high enough?
Hope so. I guess we'll find out.
See if I can get a new one over here.
Shut the door.
Think this will be better? Is this higher? I don't know. It's like
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, John, we decided that we were going to speak about dialectical assumptions, and we were going to get into it. And so, I guess just to start us off, what would you describe? How would you describe dialectical assumptions, and what are they, and why do we have them?
I guess two things come to mind. One is a dialectic in general, and the other is the place of dialectical assumptions within life and within DBT. So dialectics, being able to hold on to two things that ordinarily we might consider to be opposing one another, and instead of sort of siding with one and rejecting the other, making space for both. When thinking about dialectical assumptions within DBT, being able to have specific assumptions that will help in terms of the treatment in general, and in terms of the therapist's perspective on themselves and on the client and on the work, and for the client as well, their perspective on themselves, their therapist, and on the work too. I think that the particular dialectical assumptions that we work with were generated by Marsha Linehan in order to help facilitate effective treatment. So there's lots of dialectical assumptions that we could generate, but the ones that have been generated by Linehan have a particular purpose of helping move treatment along in an effective way.
Okay. So if, let's say, we were going to translate this into English for like people who don't know anything about DBT or dialectical assumptions, what I'm understanding from you is that this is sort of like a set of rules that we have that I guess originate in DBT, but like I guess we can get into whether they would apply to other forms of therapy or not. But it's just sort of like a basic set of rules and assumptions that as therapists we hold, and they're sort of like our point of reference that like when we're dealing with clients in the room, we deal with them with these rules in mind.
Absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
like certain like core principles of doing therapy.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah. Okay. So and I guess the only way to really understand like what the heck this means and what this has to do with therapy is to actually talk about some of them and get into them, and so
Yeah, please.
yeah. So the first one, and I guess we don't necessarily have to go in order, but I guess one that I always go back to personally as like a basic assumption is the one that says people want to improve and they want their lives to be better. What are your thoughts about that one?
I think that one is easier than some of the others, at least personally when I think about it. I think that when we think about human development and human growth, I think everybody wants to be doing better. I think that we're constantly striving towards being better, and that's true in a number of different domains, but certainly in terms of our own mental health. I think that staying stagnant comes along with a lot of pain, and being stuck in any particular place is painful. So wanting to improve, I think from an experiential perspective is easy to relate to. That we don't want to be stuck, we don't want to be hurting, we want to be beyond where we are right now. And I think sometimes that can even take on sort of ineffective or maladaptive ways of trying to get out, right? So even if we're doing things like using substances to alter sort of where we are, we're trying to improve. We don't want to be hurting. So we might fall onto something that sort of promises that, even if it's not long-term all that effective. But it's coming from that place of wanting to be outside of where we are, wanting to be better or more than we are at the moment.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that there's this idea, this core idea that we believe that people want their lives to improve. And then even if somebody comes into therapy using drugs, let's say, or in your example, the way we would see it is, okay, this person is doing that because they want their lives to improve. Now, somebody might hear the word improve and say, well, wait a second, how exactly is that improving their lives? You're just using drugs and getting stuck in drugs. But it sounds like what you're saying is that the principle that we come back to is understanding their drug use as this is their attempt to make things better for themselves, even if it's not better in terms of, the way we think your life would be better if maybe you were off drugs. But the reason why they're using drugs is because there's some sort of like worse state that they would have been in if they weren't using drugs, and they need their drugs to help them feel better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That doesn't mean to say that once they sober up that they're all that happy with where they are. And I think that people want to improve and be better and feel better long term as well, but they don't always have the requisite skills to be able to do that. So this is sort of the best that there might be at a given point in time, but not to say that it's an ideal. It's just sort of an expression of this idea that everybody wants to improve. Yeah, I think this is non-DBT, but Fritz Perls sort of relied on that assumption in Gestalt therapy. That the assumption was that everybody wants this upwards trajectory within a human being. They want to grow. So his sort of idea of engaging in experiments and helping people sort of tap in was that they are going to go to the place that they need to go to, they want to go to, because there is that upwards trajectory. So it's kind of like just getting them on the escalator and letting it go. But again, going back to that same assumption that we all have that sort of natural drive towards growth.
That sounds actually like something, on the one hand, both very, very deep and a very, I guess, a very philosophical statement about human nature on the one hand. I also can hear how it's something really scary on the other hand. Because on the one hand, what we're basically saying with this idea, and again, keeping in mind that like these assumptions call us as therapists to approach the client and approach the therapy situation with a certain fundamental understanding, is that this person is doing this negative behavior, in this example, using drugs. They're using this as a way to improve their lives. It's got its advantages, in that they get high and they can forget about the things that are in the back of their mind worrying them. It's also got its disadvantages in that it really messes up other circumstances of their lives in other ways. But they're doing it because they want to improve their lives. Underneath that, it sounds like what you're saying is that we believe that fundamentally people want to get better, and that part of them that strives for this upward trajectory is the part of them that is using the drugs. And perhaps it's our task as therapists to help them, I guess use that drive in a more adaptive way, in a more effective way, or to sort of capitalize on what is already there in order to help them move forward. And perhaps a point of alliance is on their desire to get better. That it's sort of like, because sometimes, you see somebody engaging in a really negative behavior, and our just automatic approach is, no, don't do that, right? We sort of like fight against that. And not even as therapists, I guess also as parents, as teachers, as mentors, as, whenever we're in a position of helping a person in a certain way, our instinct is to fight against the behavior and say, no, don't do that. They shouldn't do this behavior. And this idea over here is switch that up a little bit and ally with them on their inherent desire to make things better for themselves.
Yeah, I really like that. That's sort of a paradigm shift in terms of helping other people. And it sounds like what you're describing is really just reorienting sort of that drive towards improvement away from a behavior that might be effective in terms of emotional improvement in the moment, but ultimately ineffective long term. Reorienting away from that and towards something that can be effective in the short term and in the long term, but aligning with that sort of implicit goal that we're assuming is there of getting better. And if we can sort of put that on the table and recognize it and validate, I can see what you're trying to do is improve things, and we're on the same team over here.
Yeah.
Versus saying, look, like you mentioned, that's a really bad idea. Yeah, you're going to mess up your life. Don't do that. And then it's sort of we're against one another. But if we can both get on the same page that we both want what's best for you, I want you to improve and you want you to improve. Let's talk about a way that we can help you do that. And that's sort of a win-win in the short term and in the long term. And that might mean replacing the particular behavior you're using now to improve with something else. But ultimately, it's going in the same direction. It's meeting the same need.
Right, right. So let me ask you, how do you think it's possible? We do this as therapists. It's sort of like this is a principle that we hold on to as therapists in the therapy room, in terms of how we understand a person in order to help us create an alliance with the person, in order to help us not to judge the person, which, as amazing as we try to be, we're all human, and we all, as therapists, we struggle with the same human interactions, the same human responses to people that we do everywhere else. We just sort of try to hold on to these principles and work with that. What would you say it's possible to apply this principle, let's say, as a parent, and would it be different?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think we definitely could apply it as, and this goes back to, I think, what you'd mentioned at the beginning about, dialectics, and then can they be applied outside of the realm of psychotherapy? And I think the answer is yes. Being able to appreciate that if we're assuming that the desire to improve is innate, then we're not assuming that it just is relevant only to our clients. So we're assuming that's relevant to everybody, including our own children. Which means that, and maybe it's harder over there as parents when we see our children doing something that either we don't like, and then our judgments come flooding in, and that sort of threatens us in engaging with our children in effective ways, or we're afraid for our children, right? So if we see our children headed in a direction in life that we say, look, this is a really bad idea. So I, as your parent, I want to shift you away from that. I don't want you to end up, in that direction. So it's much more difficult, perhaps to sort of take that step back and recognize that they're also looking to improve. They're also looking to be, out of a situation that would be more painful for them, and it's still just as relevant. So I think as parents, if we can do that, if we can take a step back and appreciate that they're trying also to do what's going to be helpful for them, then we can also align with our children. Right. And aligning with our children is, can be really effective the same way that aligning with our clients can. If we're both on the same team over here, and I can validate, what it is that you're doing and what you're trying to do, and I'm also on your team, can we talk about other ways that might be more effective of doing the same, of trying to reach the same goal? Then we and our children can be on the same team. Now, that's not to say it's as easy, as easy as that. It's easier said than done. And sometimes children, especially when they're adolescents, might be more oppositional, no matter what. And again, I think taking that perspective, you mentioned the word being judgmental. I think a lot of the assumptions, sort of what they help us do is not be judgmental, not fall into that space of risking being judgmental, because it's those judgments of self and of others that usually fuel, and I know we haven't spoken about this yet here, but fuel our emotion mind reactions and get us to be more impulsive and more rash, and to react versus respond. And if we can hold on to these assumptions, then there's more space for us to think in a more balanced kind of way, and let go, or at least let go of being completely tied up in our judgments, and sort of make space for them on the side, recognize that they're there, while being able to engage from a place of, again, I'm going to use words here that we're not all familiar with yet, but engage from a more wise-minded and balanced sort of place. And so again, I think that having those dialectical assumptions available for us and for us to draw from in the moment allows us to put those criticisms on the side, which allow us to be more present and more focused on what it is that we want to be achieving in this particular interaction.
Right, right. Which I think might be a bit more of a challenge as a parent, because by definition, in that relationship of a parent and child, you are in emotion mind. You're emotionally involved with with your child, there's definitely that bias there. And so you see your kid doing something really unhealthy, not good for them. I guess going back to the example of doing drugs, and every emotional part of you wants to say no, don't do this. This visceral reaction. Whereas if you're a therapist, obviously you still care about your client, but you're able to sort of take a step back and be able to think more strategically and more, I hate to say objectively, but I guess more effectively about, okay, so what are we going to do here? And it's much harder to do that as a parent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess coming from that, a question that comes up for me is like, how would you put this into practice as a parent? Like, what could help you?
Yeah. I think oftentimes we know, sort of on paper, what an effective parent would look like in a given situation.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody would be coming to us and asking us, they could bring up the identical situation that we might be stuck in, and they say, well, what could I do in this situation with my child? The answer might be, relatively easy to come up with, or at least the beginning of an answer. And yet when it comes to us being stuck inside of it, when it's our experience, it becomes much more difficult. And I think in part that has to do with us losing track of, well, in this case, those dialectical assumptions, forgetting about this concept of that people want to improve, forgetting to kind of take off my emotion mind lenses and put on the dialectical lenses, and to try and see my child from the perspective of those concepts that I know to be true, or that I know to be effective within interpersonal relationships. So just being able to reference those things that we know are effective, I think, is the starting point. And doing that consistently, being able to bring those into life, living with those assumptions, will increase the likelihood that we'll be able to do it with our children as well. But if it's sort of, just a concept, and we say, well, that's a nice thing, and we can make a podcast about it and talk about it, but it sort of stays in this room or stays in our offices, and when we go home for the day, we keep it with the textbooks on the wall, and that's it. Then we're not going to have it. It won't sort of be there for reference when we need it. So I think that we need to introduce it. It needs to have space within our own experience outside, if there's any hope of it having any positive impact.
Interesting. So this kind of like goes into a different assumption, which we'll talk about in a different episode of, behaviors and skills need to be learned in the relevant context, right? But it sounds like what you're saying is, okay, so step number one is accepting this principle, right? Saying like, okay, I hear people want to improve, people want their lives to be better. I'm taking this on to hold on to this idea. And maybe step two is saying, okay, thinking about my child and what they're doing and how they're living their lives, both for, in the ways that are good for them and in the ways that are not good for them, in the ways that I approve of and in the ways that I don't approve of. How can we frame to ourselves what they're doing as their desire to improve? Which I'm wondering if sort of helps us along in this paradigm shift in terms of how we view our kids and what they do, and kind of by introducing and practicing this perspective to ourselves, that can maybe open the door to thinking of, okay, how might I respond to this differently in terms of like how I might speak to them, what I might say to them, how I might say it, what my body language might be around them. If I've engaged in conflicts with them in the past, like how might that be different if I saw this as something that they're doing to improve their lives? Not that it's good, not that they should continue doing it, because not that it's actually working to help them, but if I relate to where it's coming from in that way.
Yeah. Okay, so a couple of things are coming to mind here. One is I really like this idea of the work beginning within myself, because if within my own thinking, I sort of view my child as doing something that's awful and there's no excuse for it, and what are they doing, and they're messing up their lives, et cetera, and I'm sort of stuck in that place of being judgmental. but then I say, right, but I really need to engage with my child, in line with those dialectical assumptions. It's going to be really hard to do that because it's sort of this, on the one hand, my internal experience is one way, and then I'm just trying to implement something kind of superficially, sort of, following the rules of what I should be doing when my whole felt experience is otherwise. And I think, you mentioned the nonverbals, it's going to come out, right? So whatever is going on for me, whether it's in my tone of voice, when I'm trying to implement this idea of everybody is trying to improve, or something slips in there, that sort of goes against what I'm trying to communicate to my child. But if I don't really own sort of that dialectical assumption, and it's just lip service, and I'm trying to use it as a skill, and that's it's probably not going to be all that effective.
Right.
But if I'm instead really internalizing the concept, and I'm already, before engaging with my child, thinking about thinking about them from this perspective of they're trying to improve things, and I can really validate what it is that they're doing. That's not to say that I agree with it, or I think that it's an effective idea, at all. But it is to say that I can see sort of what it is that they're trying to do. I can validate what's valid within that, and then I can engage with them afterwards. Yeah. And it'll come off. It'll be much more. The internal and the external will be in harmony with one another versus what we were describing before. So I think that's super important.
Yeah, great point. Okay, hang on. I just want to make sure it's actually recording. Okay, still going. Yeah. I guess one thing that came to mind, like while you were talking, is I could see me or you having this conversation with a client, or with a parent, or as a parent having this conversation with a kid. I could hear situations where there's pushback against this idea that, like, people want to improve and people want to do better. Well, who says? And of course, people will go to the extreme. Like, you think Hitler wanted to improve his life and get better, So it's like, I'm just wondering, in terms of like your experience, what kind of pushback have you gotten?
Yeah, so I think this is always exciting when we run the DPT groups and we go through these assumptions. And ordinarily there is pushback, and I'm always hoping for pushback because some of them, and I think this one perhaps less than some of the others, but are difficult to accept, or can be difficult for some to accept. And if there is no pushback, it means that we're not really thinking about it. So I think let's take this one for we're focusing on this one. So everybody wants to improve. So somebody says, well, how do you know that? I don't always want to improve. I don't always do things that are heading that direction. I can certainly tell you about, A, B, C, and D. These people, there's no way they want to improve. So what I would say is, at the very worst, let's say, that it's not true all the time. That we might be engaging in something that is not geared towards improvement. Or I say, right, I know this is not going to improve anything. And I just don't care. Although, as I think about that, for this particular assumption, I don't know of an example where that would be, that we're doing something that's got no positive intention whatsoever. I don't know, but let's assume that that such a reality exists. I think that acting as if it were true, or holding on to it as if it were true, is still very effective. So even if I can sort of poke holes in it philosophically and prove why it's not true 100% of the time, that would still be okay. And I kind of think about this, sometimes there's a suggestion a person should live today as if it was their last day. Or Viktor Frankl talks about this idea of, it's kind of a variation on that, of live today as if you lived it yesterday and you messed up. And you're being given a second chance. So I know that factually I didn't live this yesterday. This didn't happen yet. This is all new. And yet, sort of seeing today from that perspective still gives me an opportunity to act differently, or to act differently today than I would have perhaps otherwise if I wasn't holding on to that perspective. And I think over here, the same thing is true, that even if I don't believe this hook, line, and sinker, being able to use that as a point of reference to engage with myself and engage with others in an effective way, that acting as if everybody is trying to improve still has a whole lot of clinical utility and interpersonal utility. And I think this again goes back to what we were talking about before in terms of being non-judgmental, that it sort of safeguards us against seeing people, in a highly judgmental way. That if I can appreciate that, yes, they're trying to improve, or at least there's a high probability that what they're doing is trying to improve, I can sort of hold on to that and frame my perspective, from that place, then chances are it's going to be much more effective than if I'm seeing them in this judgmental sort of space. I don't know if that was entirely clear, a bit rambly, but
I'll tell you what, one thing that I definitely understood from what you were saying is that acting as though if it were true, even if like, well, I don't really believe it, but acting as if it were true can be really helpful in certain situations. So, for example, in a therapy situation, for a therapist sitting with a client who we assume the best about them and we want to help them, and particularly where this client is demonstrating some really difficult behaviors, both out in the world that they're bringing into therapy and also with us in the room, that if, let's say, there's a particularly difficult interaction that is bringing up a lot of negative feelings in us as the therapist, keeping in mind the idea, okay, this person wants to improve. The rationale for this behavior is to try and make their lives better in some way. This person is trying to, that can be helpful, number one. Number two, as a parent, let's say, or I guess in any position of I'm trying to work with this person to help them get to a better place in life, you're saying more often than not, it's helpful to hold on to this idea that people want to improve. Within that, it sounds like, I guess maybe I'll ask this in question form. Do you think there are some times where people don't want to improve?
so I'll split the question up. And maybe we're sort of splitting hairs over here, and that can still be important. Uh,
I'll tell you what I think, and maybe this will jog your thoughts. I think that there are some people. I think first of all, we all have different states, right? And sometimes like we don't necessarily feel like improving, right? Sometimes we feel like just, well, actually no. Yeah. I think it's true that people want their lives to be better. I think people want to feel good. I think as a principle, I think it's true of people. Nobody wants to be miserable. And even where people do things that are making them miserable, they're doing it because it's comfortable, because it's predictable, because the pros outweigh the cons for them at this moment, right? So people want to feel good. Sometimes people will do that at the expense of other people, right? And so you might be in a situation where there's somebody who's hurting you and be like, what? This person wants to improve? Well, this person does want to feel good. That's true. And I think that's pretty much always true. I would say there are times where people don't actually want to improve. People might really be invested in things staying exactly the same because it makes them feel better. It improves their moment. But people don't necessarily want to improve themselves or their standing in life. Certainly not all the time. I know that in general, I like to think of myself as somebody who wants to improve their life, but there are definitely times where like I'm not in the mood of that. I'd rather just feel good in the moment. So I do think that's true, but I think it's true about. I think the question is where we apply this idea and how, and can we overcome our skepticism of this idea and the truth behind that skepticism in order to apply it where it can really be helpful to us.
Okay, so I like that distinction between feeling good, which is one sort of dimension of improvement, and then overall, sort of in terms of a life trajectory, improving, my standing, or improving, how I'm spending my life. Uh, and I guess the question that was coming to mind, you know, do you think that there are people who have sort of said, look, I don't want to improve anymore. I don't want to be a person who is beyond where I am now. And I'm not talking about emotionally, putting that aside, but in terms of what they're doing with their life, do you think there's somebody who said, like, I really don't want to improve? Or are there people that have sort of given up on improving, that they sort of don't have any hope that it's possible to improve? But if they could take a magic pill and improvement would happen, that they would go ahead and take it.
So that's not wanting to improve, right? If somebody already, like, I would take a magic pill if I could to improve my life, the desire for things to improve is there. I would say that they're ambivalent, because the path that they imagine having to take to get there, if they were to work for it, seems completely overwhelming, to the point of either being impossible or just being not worth it, or they don't really relate to having the energy or the ability to do it. But the desire is there.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like it would apply in that case, that this person wants to improve. And particularly where somebody comes to therapy, right, of their own volition, they make the appointment themselves, they bring themselves to us, they walk through the door, where they say, I don't want to improve, then the natural question is, so why are you here, right? Something brought you through the door. You're looking for something. And so whether or not they're going to follow the path, whether or not we can help them follow the path to get there is a different question, but they do want to improve.
Mm-hmm.
And I think where this whole thing comes from is that sometimes you hear therapists or other people in a similar position say, well, they don't want to get better. And I think that's generally fundamentally untrue.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would agree with that. I think this goes back to where we started, that it's not that they don't want to get better, rather that the only tools that they may have at the moment to feel better and to improve sort of what they're feeling is to engage in old means of coping that aren't working long term, or that they're self-sabotaging. But that doesn't mean they don't want to get better. It means that they haven't found a way to get better that has worked up until this point. And there's a lot of obstacles along the road. But it's not an indication of, well, they're engaging in these behaviors. It's clearly self-sabotaging. I've told them that it's self-sabotaging. We've done chain analyses 150 times, and we've shown sort of the consequences of these behaviors over and over, and yet they continue to repeat it. So that still doesn't mean that they don't want to improve.
Right. And something else that's coming up for me as you're talking, and going back to this idea of ambivalence and people wanting to improve even when it doesn't seem like them, is sometimes in therapy we'll use the language of parts, right? We'll conceptualize that. We're like, a part of me wants this, a part of me wants that. And I think often, you probably have this experience as well, that we see people that there's a part of them, so to speak, that wants to get better, and there's a part of them that doesn't. And sometimes, one of the parts might be present in the session, sometimes both, and there's that ambivalence that we have to help them navigate through. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. It resonates.
I think even with that part that doesn't want to get better, I don't know that that it doesn't want to improve life as much as I don't want to take the road that you're suggesting. I want to just sit and do nothing. Kind of like you were mentioning before, that there are times that we know that engaging in this particular behavior is not going to be the best choice. And right now I don't care.
Right.
I just want to enjoy. I want to kick back, and I want to be irresponsible. So it's not that.
That's interesting, because you just made, I don't know if this was deliberate, but you just made a distinction between the I guess, framing it as, I want to improve my life and I want to get better, because I feel like get better has a connotation to it. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of like getting better is sort of like framed as this obligation, like it's something coming from the outside, like my environment expects me to get better in XYZ way, which is different than the idea of improving my life, which kind of speaks to my own ownership and my own desire, my own values.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that again goes back to alignment. That if we can sort of align at the starting point of I want to improve. So I'm not here imposing my vision of what your improvement looks like, and you need to improve in this way. And I think again, going back to child raising, it's much more difficult when it comes to our own children, and we might have these biases, and not might have, we have these biases and these beliefs about how things should be. So instead of saying, right, you need to be better, and here's the recipe for getting better, follow it. We're aligning at that starting point and saying, right, you want to improve. Let's see what those possibilities are. And I think this goes into dialectics as well. We might not know what that looks like,
Right.
what
Right.
improvement looks like, or how it's going to be, and we can give space for that to sort of emerge without either of us necessarily knowing where it's going to come from or what it will look, and that's okay.
Right. That's a really good point. Because I feel like this happens a lot. And again, I guess in my mind, I'm sort of like going from therapist to parent to teacher and like anything that in that role. We might come, whether we're aware of it or not, with our own sort of like preconceived agenda of what sort of improvement this person should make in their life, right? And what that would look like, the ideal version of what this person will look like, after we're done parenting them or mentoring them or treating them, which might be very different than the idea of improvement that they have. And I think sometimes something to be aware of is that clash of agendas, because then we just completely lose the alliance.
Yeah, I think we it risks completely losing the alliance, but it also risks them not going in the direction that is right for them.
Right, right.
So that we're really limiting their growth if we're sort of superimposing our ideal version of them onto them. And it's hard because we're sort of doing it in the service of helping you. I want you to get better. I know, what better you will look like, and I know how to get you there. So just hold my hand and I'll take you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of, we're trying to help them, but if it becomes dogmatic and overly rigid and there's no space for creativity or for the unknown or for what can't be predicted, then we're really, closing off their potential and what could be for them.
Right. And that could be a tough balance to follow. I feel like less for a therapist, because I had just by nature we're in a position of being more neutral. But as a parent, so much of your agenda as a parent is tied up in your values and your morals and the things that sort of like you want to give over to your child and how you want your child to look. And it's I guess a bit of a difficult concept to really internalize that they're different and they may not walk in your path. That can sometimes be really painful for parents. And I'm wondering if this is sort of like goes into the idea of Chanoch Lanar Pidarko, and what it means, sort of like your this nar wants to improve. They have a force within themselves that is directing them upward in a certain direction. It may be different than the upward direction that you had in mind, but it's an upward direction. And perhaps our role is helping them find that direction for themselves and going upward in the direction that is them.
Yeah. See, the analogy that comes to mind is gardening, even though I know you know much more about that than I do. I know virtually nothing about it.
Pretend.
Yeah. But the idea of, I think there's a balance of instilling our values in our children, also creating boundaries for our children, and within that, giving them an opportunity to digest that and allow them to be them within, and sort of take that in and allow there to be that growth in whatever way it comes out. I can't determine how this flower is going to sprout. So I can put in the seeds. I can put water. That much about gardening, I know. I can make sure it has sunlight. But from that point on, it's up to photosynthesis to run the show. I don't have control over that.
Right.
And I think it's the same thing with with children. I can invest in them, and I should invest in them. I should impart my values, assuming that I really believe in that. and they're going to take that in and they're going to do with it whatever speaks to them, whatever way is right for them. Alpi Darkam, to use your
right.
Yeah.
Wow. So I guess that's sort of like coming full circle from this idea of people want to improve and speaking about it as therapists to just exploring how it works in the world and as a parent, and it's tough.
Yeah, it is tough, and I think it is applicable to all these areas in life. Going back to that question that you started with, and I think it does require work. It's not something that we would naturally sort of operate with, or that assumption naturally comes to mind. I think it means, putting the car in manual and bringing it in, shifting the gears into that direction, and doing that over and over and over again.
Yeah.
That we need to invest the effort in implementing that assumption if it's going to bear fruit. And I think it's it can really bear fruit and really help engage effectively. And again, with our clients, with our children, within ourselves.
Yeah, amazing. John, it's been great.
Yeah,
Look forward
likewise.
to doing more episodes, and to be continued next week, I guess.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, curious to see how that came out.